Hello guys, the review continues with the Combrei cards today. First off we have Safe Return, the Combrei card of the 1 power 2 influence cycle. In this case the 2 influence really only guarantee that this is played in the Combrei colors. Other than that it doesn't really matter because you can't even cast this on turn 1 usually because you don't have a unit in play already. And yeah, the card is not too exciting and constructed usually because you're not too interested in a card that only lets you return your own units to protect them from removal effects basically. But in limited this is a pretty decent card. I think it's still not super exciting but a fine filler in my opinion. It can counter removal, it can buff up a good unit to outclass opponents' units to better attack, for example. It can rebuy a summon trigger that you can reuse and stuff like that. And for spending 1 mana you get +1/+1 on the unit to make up for the tempo lost of paying 1 power for Safe Return, which certainly helps this card to not make you fall behind too far by using it. Next we have Awakened Student, one of the best 2-drops in the game. Really powerful card, usually at least attacks as a 3/3 on turn 3, and from there on usually easily, especially in more mid-rangey Combrei decks, grows to 4/4 or 5/5 pretty quickly, and can even get way bigger in the late game, especially if you're a little flooded, which is nice to have cards that benefit from excess power draws that otherwise wouldn't do much for you anymore. Just a great card in limited and constructed if you're in the Combrei colors and can cast it. And even if you are not that aggressive, because the guy gets so big that he is pretty high impact in the long run for a 2-drop and also makes for a really good blocker in a less aggressive deck. Next we have Desert Marshal, another staple in Combrei decks of all colors, or all kinds, better said. 2/1 for 2, it's not exciting, but the fact that it has 2 attacks at least usually allows you to trade with most other 2-drops and all 1-drops. But the real value here comes from the fact that it's a cheap silence effect that also brings a body, so it's not like silence where you just spend a card on silencing and get nothing else out of it, combined with the fact that this is ambush, which gives you a lot of potential to surprise opponents in combat, blow them out, and for example ground a flyer and then block it with a big ground guy that otherwise couldn't block the flyer and eats the flyer for free and stuff like that. There's a lot of value to be generated by the combination of ambush and silence on a cheap unit. Just a really great card in limited and constructed. Next we have Combrei Healer. Combrei Healer is another pretty good card, kind of a theme in the Combrei colors. The cards are all pretty good for their cost and what they do. Here we have a 2/2 for 3, nothing stellar at first glance, but the summon trigger is where it's at. This basically is 7 points of stats for 3 power, which is a pretty solid rate, and also 3 life force, which helps you stabilize and not get run over by aggro too easily. And the fact that 3 of those stats, the 3 points of health, do not have to go on Combrei Healer, but also can just go on whatever else you have that probably benefits much more from 3 extra health than a random 2/2, makes this really nice. For example, imagine a turn 2 student, making it a 3/3, play a Combrei Healer, make it a 3/6. Suddenly you have a 3/6 attacking on turn 3, which is really hard to deal with for a lot of decks and even harder to block this early. So yeah, a really good and versatile, more defensive or mid-rangey card in limited and constructed. Next we have Stand Together, basically the good version of Undiscovered Potential. First of all, because it's a fast spell, which makes it a lot better because you can surprise your opponent in response to burn spells or in combat to blow them out if they attacked into you or blocked for trades. And also it gives all your units Aegis, which is even better. It can counter opposing removal, it can counter opposing mass removal. Like for example, imagine your opponent casting Harsh Roll, and you just cast a stand together, completely countering it, pump your team in the process, untap, and they probably just die. Just a really powerful card in both formats once again. Generally it can be said that multi-faction cards are tendentially, on average, a lot more powerful than single faction cards, just because they are harder to cast, so if you are capable of reliably casting them, you get more value out of cards of the same cost most of the time. So they basically have multi-faction cards in various games have the tendency to have a higher risk-reward ratio, basically, since they are harder to cast, but also more powerful. Next we have Vodakhan Staff. Just a pretty basic weapon, +3/+3 for 3 power, is a pretty solid deal, and the fact that this also acts as a kind of a power sink and grind card in the late game, being able to rebuy it if you flood out a bit, is really nice and makes this even better. But even if you never rebuy it, +3/+3 weapon for 3 power is already a pretty good deal, and I'm happy to put this in any draft deck, and even to put it in a constructed deck, depending on what deck. Next we have Copper Hall Elite. All in all, pretty nice looking feller, 4 power for 4/4 that has overwhelming Aegis, pretty good stats and abilities for its cost. The one big problem in this game with cards like this is it's a time card, and if you're time, it's hard to put anything else in your deck before you have 4 Sandstorm Titans, especially if you're playing creatures. So this is why this guy usually either doesn't see play or only gets played after you already have 4 Sandstorm Titans in your deck list and might want more 4-drops, and also is very embarrassed by opposing Sandstorm Titans unless you have a way to pump it, like Vodakhan Staff, for example. So yeah, that's a bit of a game design problem with this deck in my opinion right now, that Sandstorm Titan is just so much better than every other 4-drop, especially every other 4-drop in the time faction combinations, that all other time 4-drops are kind of suppressed by it, and even a lot of other 4-drops in other factions are suppressed by the existence of Titan, and you can't even fly over him with evasive 4-drops because he also suppresses flying, so that basically makes every other 4-drop in the game more or less worse than Sandstorm Titan. But yeah, in limited, this is a great card. In constructed, well, you need to want more than 4 4-drops in your Combrei deck to play this guy, and have ways to enhance him to be able to beat stuff like a Titan. Next we have Enlightened Stranger. Enlightened Stranger is one of the premium strangers and key cards in the not really anymore existent 5-color Stranger aggro deck in constructed. In limited, this can be a pretty decent card, especially if you pick it up early. Then you can draft a bunch of strangers that you get along the way and make this actually a really good 4-drop, but it's pretty situational, so feel free to first pick this in your first pack and see if you get enough strangers. If not, maybe abandon it. It depends. Next we have Karmic Guardian. 1/4 for 4. Not the greatest cost to stat ratio here, but the battle skills are where it's at here. Flying, Lifesteal and Endurance is a pretty nice combination. Flying allows you to get damage through fairly easy every turn. Lifesteal helps you win the race, and so does Endurance, because you can attack for a little extra damage and extra life every turn without punishment. And as you can see, this once again fairly clearly is a card set up to be equipped with various weapons to benefit from the high toughness and the battle skills to turn Karmic Guardian into a monster. In Constructed, I think this is usually not good enough, too slow, too dirty, and too dependent on other cards to make it have impact, but in Limited this is a pretty good card in my opinion. Next we have Strongholds Massage. Not too exciting. The problem with this card basically is investing 5 power, basically spending your entire 5th turn on casting a card that has no impact on the game at all right away, especially not on the board, and takes a whole turn to have an effect, and then the effect is basically to gain 1 health and 1 armor, which is also not that big of an effect. So this basically has to be in play for multiple turns to even warrant the investment of 5 power, and that in order for that to happen, the game needs to go long enough, especially after you spend 5 of your power on a do nothing. So yeah, this is usually not worth the investment, but it can be fine in like very controlling decks that basically are capable of stabilizing the board and only need a way to stabilize their life total and make sure that they don't get finished off by an Alpha Strike or Burn Spell or something. That's where this is okay-ish, but it is all in all a pretty weak card in my opinion that costs you tons of tempo and barely gets you anything back and takes forever to give you any remotely meaningful effect. Next we have Champion of Progress, by far the worst champion of the champion cycle. A 6/6 for 6 with no abilities, first of all, is like with no battle skills, is pretty underwhelming already, and then the fact that it also doesn't get any battle skills from the influence affinity doesn't help, and also the influence affinity is so high that it won't be easy to make it have both influence affinity bonuses, so basically this will be maybe even a 6/6 when you play it, sometimes a 12/12, and will take quite some time to get to an 18/18, and the fact that it doesn't even have Overwhelm or any other way to make its body matter means that it can easily be jump blocked for a while in a race to try and win the race, for example, and it's just a pretty big dumb guy that you're usually not interested in Constructed. So this guy is very unplayable in Constructed, and in Limited it's fine, since 6/6 for 6 is already a pretty decent deal in Limited, and a 12/12 for 6 can sometimes win you the game if the opponent doesn't have an answer, because eventually they'll run out of trump blockers or have to put their entire board in front of it to trade or something. So in Limited it's a fine card, but still nothing too exciting compared to other rares and other multi-faction cards. Last we have Minotaur Ambassador. Minotaur Ambassador is pretty underwhelming, I would say. We know those stats for 5 power. 3/5 for 5 is already not very exciting. For 6 it doesn't get much better, actually quite a lot worse. And the fact that we get a time and a Justice Sigil at a point in the game where we already have 6 power to cast this, and at least 1 of each influence, probably more if we are only playing Combrei, doesn't really get us much either. Sure, it ramps you from 6 to 8, turning on stuff like Warden stuff, and some other abilities that have a threshold of 8. So in Limited this can be okay if you have a lot of ultimate and like stuff that happens at 8, Warden stuff, Obelisk, ultimate units and so on. But yeah, all in all, pretty underwhelming, and in Constructed this is way underpowered. So let's go over the cards that I don't own yet. 1 second. I kind of got that for Combrei this time. My bad. So there we go. So one of the cards is Knight Chancellor Sierraf. A pretty powerful 3-drop, not much else to say here. 3/4 Overwhelm for 3 is great. And the fact that it has a game-winning ability for the late game makes it even better, since at some point a 3-4 will be outclassed by what the opponent is doing, but eventually, while sitting around not being capable of attacking anymore, she can just start winning the game by spending your excess power on her ability, creating random monster units, which easily wins the game over a couple of turns if she's unanswered. So a great early and late game card. Basically perfect. I mean, a card that is great early and great late game and efficiently costed. You can't get it any better. A bomb in limited, a bomb in constructed. The other card that we didn't talk about yet is the Great Parliament. Pretty decent card. I mean, a 4 power, 4/4 flyer already is a pretty good deal, especially in limited, but even in constructed it's not bad. And now imagine this in the late game when you have 8 or 12 power because you flooded out a bit or have built your deck in a way to generate a lot of power with units that draw power and stuff. Then you're suddenly talking 2 or 3 4/4 flyers for 4 power and 1 card, which is incredible. This card is just a limited bomb and very powerful threat in the right constructed deck. Next we have Reality Warden. Pretty interesting card, kind of. Mostly it's a 5 power 7/7 vanilla body with reasonably restrictive influence, but it has an ability that can shut down certain decks. Like this ability is really valuable against reanimation type decks like Haunting Scream. Part of why this guy doesn't see much play currently is because Haunting Scream doesn't see too much play either. But if the top decks are trying to do stuff with the units from their void, this card is a really great way to stop that. It's a nice sideboard card against Haunting Scream potentially, and just 7/7 for 5 is a pretty aggressively casted body as well. And a limited, a 5 power 7/7 if you're Combrei, it's just great. So all in all, a pretty good card, just not really having a place in constructed at the moment as much. Next we have the 7 power legendary of Combrei, Vodakhan Temple Speaker. Once again, 7 power, 6 influence, pretty restrictive cost, have to be deep in Combrei in order to reliably cast this guy on 7. His stats are equal to your maximum power, so this will at least be a 7/7 normally when you play it. The problem is a bit that he has no battle skills at all, so he's basically just an unevasive vanilla fatty that doesn't even overwhelm opposing units or anything. So can be trump blocked for a while if needed. Is not the most reliable attacker in a race if the opponent is swinging back for enough. But yeah, eventually he will just be big enough, for example, to force the opponent to trump block because he's big enough or bigger than the opponent's life total, and then he will eat up a unit every turn and stuff like that. And he gives all your power cards Destiny, which is the highest impact part of what he does basically, since he makes it so you don't draw any more power cards for the rest of the game, because if you draw one, they get replaced and you draw another card until you draw a non-power card basically, which is a pretty nice advantage, especially in limited, since while your opponent is drawing power cards every couple turns, you just draw all gas, and that alone will make you win a limited game eventually, because it just outcard advantage the opponent. So in limited, this is still a pretty powerful card. In constructed, a 7 power unit with no protection and no battle skills and no immediate effect when you play it, no summon ability or anything, is not very good. This will often eat a removal that's way cheaper than him, and then you just lost a lot of tempo, which is why you don't see him in constructed decks normally. The last card is a pretty weird one, a New Tomorrow. So first of all, 10 power is a lot of power for cost. And you would expect something really powerful to happen if you spend 10 power ever and like get to a point where you're still not dead and have that much power. And you're also not already winning and the game is basically over. But instead you get the top 10 power cards from your deck in play depleted. So you're already flooded and now you're twice as flooded as before. And there's also not many cards in the game to take advantage of having 20 plus power in play. So yeah, that card is just not worth the investment of time and resources, and yeah, it's just a bad card in my opinion. There were weird ramp decks in closed beta at some point that played this and tried to follow it up with the Great Parliament to generate a lot of owls, but this is just so much hassle and so many hoops to jump through to get to 10 power, cast this card, and eventually then like a turn later on turn 10 or 11 cast a Great Parliament for a lot. This is just way too cute. You're probably already dead by then or winning anyway because your opponent isn't doing anything, so anything would win at that point. So yeah, the card's pretty terrible in my opinion in Constructed and Limited. That's the last Combrei card for today. That concludes the review of the Combrei cards. Next time we're gonna follow up with the next faction combination, which is Elysian. So stay tuned for the next video with the Elysian cards, probably coming up tomorrow. And as usual, if you learned anything from this, found it interesting or entertaining, please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. And thanks for watching. See you next time with the Elysian cards. Bye!